Hello friends, this is Growl. In this video, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about playing Holy Paladin in 9.1 Mythic Plus. This video is going to be basic and mostly just cover my choices and why I do what I do, but I'll also include a lot of stuff I've learned pushing high keys as a Paladin over the first season. And this way, I hope it's going to be helpful for those who are picking up the spec for the first time, as also people who are returning and just trying to figure out what's going on with the patch. I also make tons of stuff like other video reviews for other classes as well as stream high keys, so don't forget to subscribe to the channel and also go follow my Twitch. Links for that as well as the weak auras and UI stuff and everything that you'll see is going to be in the description of the video. Let's get started. HPAL is a very high DPS melee healer. It is very fun in my opinion because most of the abilities that you use are going to be instant cast. You don't have to hard cast at all. So it feels very mobile, although you're tied into melee. Almost your entire rotation is going to involve not hard casting at all, which to me is pretty enjoyable and pretty fun. It is considered a very, very strong healer for both Mythic Plus and Raid right now because it has all the toolkits it needs to be a good healer, as well as very solid damage and also very good utility and an immunity. It did receive 3 separate changes in 9.1, the first one being a pretty significant damage nerf in the magnitude of like 15 to 18%. This was definitely needed, and even with the nerf, I still feel like it's going to be pretty good. Crusader's Might was also nerfed. This was a go-to talent in the row. I think in Mythic Plus, you'll still be running Crusader's Might. However, it is worth experimenting with Bestow Faith and Light's Hammer, especially in Raid. The last one is they've increased the mana cost on some abilities, namely Holy Shock and Crusader Strike. These won't affect your gameplay too much. However, we're going to need to maybe rein in on the haste a little bit because previously it was just pedal to the floor, run as much haste as you can, but now if you hit a certain level, you're going to run out of mana. Let's go through the checklist. First, we'll talk about race. It doesn't really matter what race you play. If you want to play a race, just play it. In Mythic Plus, I would say Dwarf is probably the most useful, either Dwarf or Dark Iron, and Blood Elf for Horde, just because you get some usage out of those abilities against certain things. But ultimately, you don't really have that much of a choice as a Paladin anyway. For stats, as I mentioned, haste is going to be a really solid stat. Our goal is to get to about 25 to 30% haste. However, if you go too high, you're going to find that you're going to start running out of mana. So I would be careful going too high. And in general, the idea is going to be get to 25 to 30% haste, then just go towards crit and verse. Crit and verse are better than mastery, specifically because mastery doesn't help with your damage. Healing wise, mastery is great, but as a paladin, part of what you bring is that you bring that passive damage that healers like maybe Holy Priest or Resto Druid don't necessarily have. And doubling down and doing more damage is going to make you stand out and, you know, accomplish the goals that you want to accomplish as a paladin. For trinkets, we have a lot of options. A safe go-to is always Changeling. Changeling is a nice stat proc and is just very high value, good uptime, and is something that you can easily get your hands on from Miss. The PvP trinkets, both the haste with the int proc and the on-use int one, are both pretty good. They are nerfed in PvE now, however, with Paladin, they're still pretty solid trinkets. There's also 2 new trinkets. I don't have one. One of them is called the Tome of Insight. It's from doing Korthia stuff. It's just sort of a random drop. You can buy it from the chests. Another one is from Tazavesh. It is called the Healing Distributor. This is a beast in Raid right now, even at a lower item level, because it gives you both haste and healing. However, I'm not sure how it's going to be in 5-man, so this is something that you'll want to get your hands on and kind of try it out. It'll be a good filler trinket, and it'll be easy to farm early on. Other than that, basically, you just want stats. If you can't get a hold of those, you can use an on-use trinket like Ruby or IQD. These are going to be good for your damage. You can use them during your Ashen and your Wings. However, they're going to be a little bit less consistent for healing, and they're not really going to help you in the spots that you struggle with. I think Tuft is also an okay trinket. This is from the previous raid, so don't worry about going back to get this if you feel like you if you don't have it yet. However, this is a nice trinket. It can fill in for some single target healing. It's going to be a big damage loss though, so it's not something that you want to generally use like in every dungeon anymore. However, it might still be something that you want to use sometimes. For enchantments, we are using all the same stuff. We use stamina and avoidance or leech on cape. Either one's fine. I prefer avoidance. 30 primary stats on chest, 15 intellect on bracers. You can also get the reduced fall damage boots, which is nice. And for the rings and gems, as I said, we want to reach this haste breakpoint. I think by the end of the tier, once you're pretty well geared, you're not going to need any haste gems, and you're probably just going to be full gemmed verse. Although while you're gearing up, you may want to put some haste until your globals feel good. For consumables, we have Shadow Core Oil. This is just a small passive damage, as well as Spectral Flask. This is a very nice stat boost. For food, I use the Crown Roast for haste. Any of the food buffs are honestly fine. Preferably you use the Int Feast, but those are really expensive, so we don't always want to use those. We have Int Pots that we use during our wings and Ashen, ideally. However, there's a lot of times in Mythic Plus where you will need to use Invis Pots or Mana Pots or something like that, so don't worry about Int Potting all the time. It's just something you want to have occasionally for like maybe a really hard boss or something. Heavy Desolate Armor Kits are a nice free stamina increase. They last for multiple keys. And if you're really tryharding, you want to spend some money, you can buy Augment Runes. I don't always use these, but I like to have them on hand. You can get them from your mission table if you've been working on that. And it's good for like, you know, really, really hard key, or if you're, you know, really trying to impress somebody. Now for Legendary, there's 3 main talking ones here. The first one is going to be Shock Barrier. This is your safe go-to pick for all forms of content. If you want something easy, you don't want to worry about it, you just want some passive healing, Shock Barrier is great. It'll be useful in Mythic Plus, useful in Raid, useful in PvP. It's just great everywhere. As a first craft, especially if you're a little nervous, if you'll be able to heal, you might be under geared, Shock Barrier is a good one. If you're ready to jump in, you know, the full damage Venthyr mode in Mythic Plus, I think most people are going to be running Mad Paragon's Pursuit. This is going to be your highest DPS Lego because it's boosting your Hammer of Wrath, which also gets boosted by your Venthyr ability, Ashen Hollow. It extends your wings to make sure that your wings is lasting for almost the whole duration of your Ashen Hollow, which is really nice. Now, although this isn't a raid guide, I do want to mention Maraud's too. You may end up wanting to craft this early. I think the verdict still isn't out yet whether Shock Barrier or Maraud's is good. I think we might see some good Paladins running Maraud's in raid. However, I think Shock Barrier is a very reasonable alternative, and this will be much easier in terms of the rotation. However, Maraud's gives you a little bit more flexibility and gives you more spot healing in raid if you have those trouble players who tend to need a lot of healing. Next, we'll talk about Covenant. So it's a very hotly discussed topic, Kyrian versus Venthyr. I'd say that the common word on the streets is like, Venthyr is good for organized group, Kyrian's better for pugs. I don't fully subscribe to that. The way I see it is, if you're really comfortable as a healer, Venthyr is going to be better. If you're less comfortable, Kyrian's better. That's because the Venthyr ability, it's a very long cooldown, but if you know the right pulls to use it on, you drop that Ashen and then you're just blasting, then it'll eliminate a lot of the really hard pulls and bosses in a way that Divine Toll can't really. However, if you're less familiar and you need like more consistent healing, you know, every minute, you're a little afraid of wasting your cooldowns and you're not really sure when you want to use it, then using Kyrian, you'll probably have better results. Ultimately, both are pretty good, Kyrian or Venthyr, so don't feel too bad if you feel, you know, if you really want to use one or the other. I feel like, you know, don't stress too much about this decision. Also, feel free to switch. You know, I know it's kind of a pain to level up your campaign, but if you're playing one and you want to see how the other feels, you know, don't feel too bad about leveling the other one up and switching. You know, it gives you something to do if you're mainly focused on your HPAL. Now we'll talk about Soulbinds. I'm not going to go into specifics because we're all kind of figuring this out still, but the summary is that your potencies are not very good. And ideally what we want to do is we want to sub out a potency for a good passive on the tree. So the best example of that is this Theatar one right here. Instead of taking this path with the potency, we actually take this path with the finesse, and that gives us Wasteland Propriety, which gives you verse during your Ashen Hollow, which is better than any potency that you can get anyway. So not only do we get this finesse, but we get this strong ability. And this is why I think Theatar will probably be the go-to. However, we're not totally sure. Your best potency for either Kyrian or Venthyr is going to be your Covenant one, your Ashen Hollow, or your Divine Toll one. For Kyrian, I think Kleia is the tree you want to go, because Kleia has a similar line like this, where you can pass up a potency and you can take a permanent crit buff if you have nearby allies, which is very strong as well. So yeah, ideally we want only a 2 potency path that gives us like a really strong passive. For our second potency, I'm really not sure. I've been experimenting. Lately, I've just been going with Focus Light. I feel like this one's kind of underwhelming. However, you know, none of the other options are that great either. You know, if you wanted to try out some of these other ones, I don't think you'll be too bad off trying them. You're not losing too much with this one. As for finesse, there's actually two really, really good finesse. So Light's Barding basically doubles the duration of your Divine Steed. Divine Steed, aside from Door of Shadows, is your only movement ability, really. And having a 6-second Divine Steed versus a 3-second is actually a huge difference. Another finesse that's really good is Echoing Blessings. This boosts your freedom and your sack. This is almost essentially a potency, you know, making your sack better and your freedom better. Sack especially, it'll really help reducing tank damage or any sort of damage, you know, if you use that sacrifice often. So these are both really, really strong. For endurance, none of them are that great. My go-to is always Shielding Words. Shielding Words, because you're using Wog so much, is going to buff... It's going to essentially buff your Wog for AoE healing, because it's going to give you a little shield, give you a 24% boost on your Wog. And even on AoE healing scenarios, you're probably using Wog. So let's go over talents. For talents, Paladin has a really good tree, so there's lots of options. Don't feel too bad if you want to try something else. Again, you know, just like the other things we talked about, a lot of this stuff is good. You know, there's no like, oh, this is the right build and don't run anything else or you're trolling. In the first row, I do prefer Crusader's Might still in Mythic Plus, even after the nerf. Although I think it is, you know, I think these options may have some merit. You know, we'll have to experiment. But before, Crusader's Might was basically the only one you'd care about. In this row, Judgment of Light is going to be your highest healing option of the three. However, Saved by the Light could be used if you feel like your tank is struggling a lot. This is mainly concentrated on tank healing, whereas Judgment sort of spreads it out on everybody. Usually, Paladin, you could use the AoE healing, so that's why I like to take Judgment. On this row, depends on what you need. I would say Blinding Light is the most versatile. Fist of Justice and Repentance are also fine if you feel like you need either of these. In the 35 row, Unbreakable Spirit's great. You use these abilities often, as we'll talk about later in the rotation cooldown section. Holy Avenger is my go-to here for Venthyr. This is because it combines with Awakening. Anytime you're in trouble, Holy Avenger is sort of my in-between button. If I need emergency healing and I don't have wings active, that's because you get so much more holy power. So you pop your Holy Avenger, you're using abilities that generate holy power, and you have a much higher chance to proc wings during the duration of that Holy Avenger. And because I'm making a video, it's just not going to proc, even though I try and do it 90 million times. Okay, just pretend like I procced wings. Okay, there we go. Good. So while you press your Holy Avenger, the chance of getting at least one wings proc is pretty high, and then that way you have HA and wings for an emergency moment, which will help a lot for your in-between healing. If you're Kyrian, you don't necessarily need that. You can sort of get away without running Holy Avenger, and that opens up the option for Seraphim or DP. Both of these options are going to be higher overall throughput than Holy Avenger will be, so experiment with both of these. I've been seeing a lot of Paladins playing Seraphim with Kyrian. However, I've mostly been Venthyr, so I haven't had much to say about this. I think Divine Purpose will definitely be easier, but with Kyrian, you're going to get so much holy power, that you may get very good use out of this, especially, you know, let's say you want to use Divine Toll, right? Spend your holy power with Seraphim, then use your Divine Toll. You have a ton of crit and verse with it. The 12% mastery also goes a long way with helping your healing, because generally your mastery is going to be really low as well. And in the last row, the beacons, a lot of people get confused about this row. So think about it. Don't worry about Glimmer. Think about it in the way your beacon works. This is one big beacon. This is 2 medium beacons. And this is 5 spread out beacons, right? Or 4, I guess. And so depending on what sort of healing you feel like you need, you take accordingly. As a default, you want Glimmer because you want that tank healing. Paladin, generally not the best tank healer, and having additional tank healing will help you be able to just do your rotation and not have to worry about the tank as much. If you have the need for a little bit more group healing, you'll see some Paladins run Beacon of Faith. This is good if, you know, again, you want a little bit more group healing, or maybe you just have the one zoo animal in your group that just takes twice as much damage as everyone else, and that zoo animal might be you. And this is a great opportunity for Beacon of Faith. Beacon of Virtue, you have to be careful because now you're not getting any tank beacon. So you're losing a lot of tank healing when you run Beacon of Virtue. This should only be used in sort of like emergencies if you're really struggling with the AoE healing. You know, examples might be, let's say you're really under geared, but you're playing with a really good tank who's helping you, you know, then you can just run Virtue because he'll be fine. Or maybe it's a really tough AoE week, like Bursting or Grievous or something like that, and you're really struggling and you need some more AoE healing. But generally you should avoid Virtue because you're going to be hurting your tank by running that. So now let's talk about the rotation. So the plan is basically you just want to be using Holy Shock and Word of Glory as much as possible to do your main healing, and then otherwise just spamming all your DPS abilities. So on single target, Consecrate is not very important, and you're mainly just worried about using your Judgment on cooldown, using your Crusader Strike, using your Holy Shock. If there's nothing else to do, then you can press your Consecrate, and usually you can still keep Consecrate up on single target. I just want to stress that it's not super important. However, on AoE, Consecrate becomes very valuable because it is just, you know, it's hitting every single target and it ends up being a lot of your damage. So on AoE, this is something where you may want to run in the very first button you press is Consecrate and do your best to just constantly refresh it every time you can. This will be a pretty big damage increase, especially if you're not used to playing Paladin, you're not used to keeping that Consecrate up. That'll be one of your biggest damage sources. As for what you spend your holy power on, you have three choices, right? You have Word of Glory, you have Light of Dawn, and you have Shield of the Righteous. On AoE, if you don't need healing, using Shield of the Righteous is always good. This is because it's uncapped AoE. It hits in a very like small cone kind of thing, but if there's a bunch of mobs stacked up on the tank, you can actually blast and do a lot of damage with that Shield of the Righteous. Even, you know, especially during Holy Avenger, let's say you pop it and then you're okay and you're just trying to do damage. And again, during Wings, that'll help your damage with Shield of the Righteous as well. On single target, using Shield of the Righteous isn't as good, and you'd usually just want to spam just healing abilities to proc Wings. Even at full health, it's probably better to heal and proc the Wings. I would say, you know, technically I think Shield of the Righteous is slightly higher, but if you always just wanted to spam trying to get a Wings proc on single target, I think that's fine. Usually I try and look for any excuse to proc Wings, but like let's say the mob is about to die or whatever, if it's an execute, then usually I'll just use Shield of the Righteous. So then it's Word of Glory or Light of Dawn. Almost always you'd rather spot heal with Word of Glory rather than use Light of Dawn. This is because Light of Dawn's range is very small, and on top of that, it doesn't really do that much more healing than WoG does. In order to make Light of Dawn worth it, you basically need to hit your whole team, and it needs to be worth healing, right? Like let's say a mage is in Alter Time, or your tank is at full HP, or someone, right? You're just losing tons of value off that Light of Dawn. So almost always, unless you have a good reason to use Light of Dawn, just be spamming WoG. And, you know, as a Paladin, it's very important to see who's in danger and prioritize that on your party. And, you know, that's an important skill to have. So generally just be using WoG. Although let's say everyone's like at, you know, 95% health or something like that, and you're just trying to proc your Wings, I think using just spamming Light of Dawn is fine there. You'll see me use it sometimes. Ultimately, you know, if it doesn't matter, then you can use Light of Dawn, but try and prioritize WoG. Now let's talk about cooldowns. So during Wings, it's pretty simple to heal, right? You get that huge crit and healing buff. You can do big healing. During Ashen, it's pretty straightforward to heal, right? You just have healing on everybody. The key is healing in between those, right? And the key to healing in between those is using all of your small cooldowns effectively. So all the things that we have, right? We have any unused trinkets. We have Bop, Sack, Aura Mastery with Devo, Bubble, and Lay on Hands. All of those abilities are so good, and the key to staying alive is using them effectively. So as a general habit, let's say you know, this is a really scary area we're walking into, right? And oh no, I wasted my Wings or whatever, I don't have Wings. As I'm walking into the next pull, I'm sort of taking count of what I have here. I'm saying, okay, I have Sack, I have Bubble, and I have Lay on Hands, right? And a lot of times Sack and Bubble can be used in tandem with each other to reduce damage. So for example, let's say either your tank is getting blasted really hard, or if it's just group damage, and maybe someone on your team is like a squishy cloth guy, or they're just taking a lot of damage, using Sack on them and then bubbling yourself is going to reduce a ton of that group damage. And, you know, then it'll focus it to 3 people, right? Well, let's say you have beacon on 1 guy or 2 guys, you know, then you're really only spot healing 1 or 2 people. And that's how you essentially have that. That's how you counteract that I don't have wings emergency. So every time you go into a pull, you think it might be scary, you know, think about ahead of time what you have, right? Because in an emergency, when your brain's panicking and you don't know what's going on, it's really hard to think like, okay, my sack's almost up, like I have lay on hands, okay, bubble, you know, like, but if you go into this pool and you're like, okay, as soon as bad stuff happens, I'm gonna sack bubble, and then that's my first line of defense, and then if I fall behind, then I'm gonna use lay on hands, right? If you go into the pool with that plan, your reactions are gonna be so much faster, and the key is to prevent the damage, right? Bubble, sack, and devo and bop all only prevent damage. They don't push the health bar back up. So being proactive with those abilities is key here. Again, you're defensive too. Divine Protection. It's a 42-second cooldown. Just slam that thing. Anytime you think you're going to take any damage, just slam that thing. It's not on the global. It, you know, it comes back whenever you need it. Just keep pressing this button. It's so good. And you also have some good utility as well. Your 2 most important utilities in Mythic Plus are going to be Blinding Light, if talented, and Hajj. This is because you can stop really important casts with this, you know, specifically casts where maybe your team doesn't feel like interrupting, but you're going to die if it gets off. So what I'll do a lot of the times, let's say I'm walking into a pull, right, and this one guy has a cast that's really important. I'll set this guy in focus, and I have a focus target Hajj bound, and while I'm DPSing, I'm doing whatever, I'm watching this out of the corner of my eye, and I'm seeing if it starts a cast that the DPS it doesn't interrupt, and I'll go bam, and I'll Hajj it, right? Even if I don't even have it selected, that's a very important thing to do. There's lots of situations where that's useful. Halls of Atonement, some of the trash pulls with like Loyal Beasts or the cast, really, really important. Another thing I'll do is Blinding Light again, right? So I notice, oh, I use my Hajj, I don't have it. Now I have Blinding Light. You don't even need to have the mob targeted, right? Just bam, Blinding Light. It stops everything. You don't need to worry about the stun duration. You're only using it as a temporary stop. So that's damage reduction, damage protection. And all that stuff combined, right? When you go into a pull and you think, oh man, that was impossible to heal without wings, or, you know, oh, my team pulled too big, it's their fault, bad tank or whatever, right? Well, if you went into the pull and you're like, okay, this guy's gonna get a cast off, you Hajj that cast, like you realize your tank is about to get hurt, you throw sack on him, you bubble yourself, like, you know, all these things you can do to prevent damage. And when you watch the best HPALs in the world, when you watch Ellismere, when you watch Smok, when you watch Zalia, you know, they're slamming out those abilities. You know, they don't even hesitate before they use one of those, because they know they're going to need to think quick and act quick if they want to survive without their big cooldowns. So that pretty much covers all of my what I have to say about Paladin. Hopefully this helped you understand, you know, what was expected of you, what choices you should make. I tried to cover a lot of the common questions. You know, keep in mind this is the first week of the patch. We're still learning, and hopefully in future videos I will revisit and talk about some of these things if there are updates or good stuff from the raid. If you guys have any questions or other tips or just important stuff, feel free to leave those in the comments, and I may pin a comment as well if I think there's some updates or some important stuff that I want to talk about. So as always, thanks for watching, and a happy keying, friends.